You ever get that feeling like, you hit a big goal, and you're like, yes. But then like 2 seconds later, you're already thinking about the next thing you got to do.
Oh, yeah.
Or like that kind of constant pressure to just keep climbing higher.
Yeah.
Like there's some promise that happiness is waiting for you, like at the top of the mountain or something.
Right.
For those of you listening who really want to unpack all this stuff,
Yeah.
but without getting bogged down in a bunch of psychobabble, well, this deep dive is for you.
It's interesting. For the longest time, people have always said, like, success is the key to happiness, right? You got to put in the work, get the rewards, hit those milestones, and then finally, you can relax and be happy.
Okay, so let's get into that, because our source material for this deep dive, Shawn Achor's The Happiness Advantage, kind of flips that whole idea on its head, right?
Yeah.
He's talking about a decade of research in this field called positive psychology and also neuroscience. And the big takeaway is that the link between happiness and success actually goes in the opposite direction.
Yeah, totally. The research is getting clearer and clearer. Happiness isn't just something that shows up after you're successful. It's actually what helps you get there in the first place. So when we're happier, more optimistic, it actually helps our performance, our ability to actually achieve things. It actually gets better. It's not just about feeling good. It's about having a real advantage, which Achor calls the happiness advantage.
Right.
Yeah.
So our mission, this deep dive, is to kind of pull out those key insights from the happiness advantage that can help you guys really understand this new perspective and, more importantly, figure out how to use these ideas, whether it's at your job or just in your everyday life.
Exactly.
So are you ready to jump in?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Let's start by breaking down why that old idea that success leads to happiness, why it often doesn't really hold up. You ever notice that? Like, when people reach a big goal, that happiness, it doesn't really stick around for that long.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, it's like that definition of success, it's always changing, right? Like you get that promotion, but then boom, everyone's looking at the next one. Or you nail a presentation, but then it's like, okay, on to the next project. It's like happiness is always like just out of reach, just around the corner.
Yeah.
And Achor makes the point that even when we do achieve those things, it doesn't necessarily mean like lasting happiness.
Right. And this is where positive psychology comes in. Instead of just focusing on what makes people unhappy and trying to get them back to neutral, it's more about understanding what makes people thrive and do really well.
Right.
And there's growing evidence that happiness, having a positive outlook, these things actually drive how well we perform, how much we achieve. It's not just a feel-good thing, it's a real advantage.
And Achor was right in the middle of this field development, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he talks about his mentors at Harvard, like Phil Stone, Ellen Langer, Taleb Ben-Shahar. These were like the pioneers of positive psychology, bringing, solid scientific methods to studying this stuff.
Right. Yeah. And another thing that's interesting is how traditional research deals with data that doesn't quite fit the mold. Those outliers, they're often seen as just noise in the data, so they get tossed out so researchers can focus on the general trends.
Right, but here's a totally different way to think about it. Achor's saying we shouldn't throw those outliers away. We should actually be zeroing in on the positive ones, the people who aren't just doing okay but are really thriving, to see what they're doing differently and how we can use that to lift everyone up.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a whole new way to look at things. It's not about asking what's wrong with the people who are struggling, but rather what are the people who are excelling doing that's different.
Exactly.
And this is where your aha moments come in, those insights that change how you see things.
And Achor shares this really interesting story about a wellness week at this like super prestigious boarding school. You'd think it'd be all about, positive stuff, right? But the topics they were covering were like eating disorders, depression, drug use, risky behavior. It was like, as he put it, a sickness week disguised as a wellness week.
It's a perfect example of something we see all the time. We're kind of wired to focus on the negative, whether it's research, education, even the news. This constant negativity can train our brains to see the world as more negative than it actually is, like medical school syndrome, where students learning about diseases start thinking they have them all. Just shows how focusing on the negative can mess with our well-being and our whole outlook on things.
And then there's the whole pressure cooker environment at places like Harvard, right? You've got these super smart, driven students.
Yeah.
But then they get there, and suddenly they're in a group where like half of them are below average compared to their peers.
Yeah.
That pressure to not just succeed, but to be like exceptional is just huge.
And when these high achievers hit a roadblock, the fall can be that much harder. And interestingly, that pressure, The worry about not being good enough, maybe even depression, can lead to people shutting down and isolating themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Achor noticed that these brilliant students, despite all their academic success, sometimes missed out on developing the skills to use their brains to the fullest, find purpose, or build those strong support systems. They were so busy building the perfect resume that they kind of skipped over those experiences that could have actually made them happier and healthier in the long run.
Yeah. And here's the thing, when things get tough, instead of reaching out to friends, family, mentors, they pull away. And that's despite all the research saying those relationships are super important for success and happiness, right? Tons of studies show that strong social connections mean better mental and physical health, less stress, and better performance in all areas.
It goes against that when the going gets tough, the tough get going idea, right? They get going right to their isolated cubicle. But Achor's research, along with all the other positive psychology findings, it's saying that kind of isolation could actually be harmful.
Exactly. So maybe instead of just grinding away, pushing ourselves to the max, there's a better way. Acres study with 1,600 Harvard undergrads, one of the biggest studies ever done there on happiness, it started to show why some students thrived while others struggled in that tough environment.
Yeah, yeah. And this research hinted at some really important principles that he really gets into in the book. He kind of teases us with ideas like the Tetris effect, which is about how we can actually train our brains to see possibilities, or falling up, which is about finding growth even when we hit setbacks, or social investment, which highlights how crucial our support systems are. Right.
Right.
These are just a few examples of how we can go from just getting by to actually thriving.
And this leads to a question that's probably on your mind right now. Can we actually become happier? Is it something we're born with, or can we actually change it? Achor tackles what he calls the myth of fixed potential, the idea that our abilities are set in stone and our brains can't really change that much.
That whole idea is so deeply rooted.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. But Achor, he uses this really cool analogy to challenge it, the okapi. For a long time, it was considered a mythical creature, like a zebra-giraffe hybrid, something people talked about but never actually saw.
Right.
Then boom, in the early 1900s, they found some live okapis, proving they were real, not just a fantasy. And he connects that to how people were skeptical about the idea that our brains can actually change.
Yeah. For most of the 20th century, scientists thought that once you hit adulthood, your brain was pretty much set. The idea of neuroplasticity, that our brains are actually really flexible and can change throughout our lives, it was kind of dismissed, like it was this outlandish idea.
Right. But then this really compelling research started coming out, showing that our brains really can change. Achor talks about that study with London taxi drivers,
Yeah.
right? To navigate all those crazy streets in London, you need insane spatial memory.
Right.
And guess what?
Right.
The researchers found that the taxi driver's hippocampi, the part of the brain responsible for spatial memory, they were way bigger than the average person's.
That's pretty wild. And it's strong evidence that our brains aren't static. They can actually change physically because of what we experience and learn. It's not like these folks were born with giant hippocampi because they knew they'd be driving taxis. It had to be from their training and doing that job.
And then there's this really inspiring story about a guy named Roger who went blind but developed this incredible sense of touch. He could read Braille like it was nothing. And when they scanned his brain, they saw that the areas for touch had become more developed, basically rewired themselves because he couldn't see anymore.
Yeah. These examples show that brain change is real. It's backed by solid neuroscience. And what's so cool about this is that if our brains are that adaptable, then maybe we can do way more than we thought in terms of growing and learning new things.
Exactly. Like we can rewire our brains to be more positive, more creative, to handle challenges better, and even be more productive. It's like the limits on what we can do, they're not as fixed as we might think.
Right. And Achor ends that part by saying that the rest of the book digs into how we can tap into this power to change, how to use neuroplasticity to become happier and more successful.
So if we really can change, the question is, can we make it last? Can we actually boost our happiness for good?
The good news is research has shown that, yeah, we can raise our baseline level of happiness and make a positive mindset more consistent, not just like little bursts of joy.
But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Just reading about this stuff isn't enough. You got to put in the effort, practice these techniques regularly to make them a part of your life and see the benefits. It's like learning any skill. You got to actually do it to get good at it.
And what's great about Achor's stuff is it's not just some self-help fluff. It's all based on research.
Yeah.
These things have been tested and proven to work.
Right. He actually wants to close that gap between, like, cool science and things you can actually do in your everyday life.
Totally. And this leads to a huge shift in how we think. For so long, we've been told success is at the center and happiness is like this bonus you get if you work hard enough. That whole grind, 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 then be happy mentality.
I feel that. But positive psychology is saying, hold on a second. It might actually be the other way around. Happiness might actually be the center, and success kind of revolves around that. When we're more positive, feeling good, the research is saying we actually think better, we're more motivated, and as a result, we do better at what we do.
But the word happiness, it can be a bit vague, right? Achor tells this funny story about trying to explain happiness to a group of Samsung execs who didn't speak English. It highlights how hard it is to really define it in a way that works for everyone.
Yeah.
But he clarifies that the real engine of happiness is positive emotions. And Barbara Fredrickson, she's done a lot of research on this, she says there are 10 common positive emotions: joy, gratitude, serenity, interest, hope, pride, amusement, inspiration, awe, and love. This gives us a much clearer picture of what we're actually trying to cultivate.
Right. So we're not just talking about like a general sense of happiness. We're talking about specific positive feelings.
Exactly. And those positive feelings aren't just nice to have, they change how our brains work and how we act. Negative emotions, they tend to make us focus in, like that fight or flight response.
Right.
But positive emotions do the opposite.
Right.
This is where Barbara Fredrickson's broad and build theory comes in. Positive emotions actually open up our minds to more possibilities, making us more creative, thoughtful, and open to new ideas.
Interesting.
Think about those priming experiments. When people are feeling amused or content, they can come up with a wider range of thoughts and solutions compared to when they're anxious or angry. And that wider perspective isn't just helpful in the moment. It helps us build intellectual, social, and physical resources that we can use later on.
And to really show how much these positive feelings matter, especially when it comes to thinking, Achor talks about this study called Give the Doc a Lollipop.
That's a great name for a study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It involved these experienced doctors doing a simulated diagnosis.
The researchers wanted to see if a little boost of happiness could make the doctors better at diagnosing, especially with that anchoring bias, where people get stuck on their first impression even when there's new evidence.
So they split the doctors into 3 groups. One group got candy to make them feel happy, another got neutral statements about medicine, and the last group was just a control group.
And the results were pretty amazing. The doctors who got the candy, they not only got the diagnoses right, way faster, but also showed way less anchoring. They were more flexible and creative in their thinking.
I mean, that's pretty crazy, right? Just a little piece of candy made these experienced doctors twice as effective and more creative. It's like these small positive boosts can have a huge impact.
Yeah, it makes you think, right?
Yeah.
What if hospitals, businesses, any workplace focused on making people happier, even just a little bit? It could lead to big improvements in how well they work and how innovative they are.
Absolutely. And Achor, he mentions the undoing effect too, which is the idea that positive feelings can help us bounce back from negative ones faster. And then he goes into all these practical ways we can actually lift our mood and our happiness levels every day. And he really stresses that if we do these things consistently, we can actually shift our overall happiness up for good.
The key is finding what he calls person-activity fit, which basically means finding things that really work for you. Not every happiness booster is going to be a home run for everyone.
Right. But he gives some really solid research-backed examples. One is to commit conscious acts of kindness. Studies are always showing that being kind and helping others, it actually reduces stress and makes us feel better. Sanja Lubomyrsky, she's a researcher who suggests that doing just 5 acts of kindness a day can make a big difference. It's all about doing it on purpose. Even something small, like paying for the person behind you in the coffee line, can make a difference.
And another word is to cultivate gratitude. Taking time each day to think about, 3 good things that happened. This trains your brain to look for the good stuff. There's tons of ways to do this, setting reminders on your phone, making it a part of your morning or evening routine, even sharing it with your family or coworkers so you have some support and accountability.
Yeah, I like that. He also mentions fine flow. That's that feeling when you're totally absorbed in something and your skills match the challenge perfectly, so it's like super engaging and enjoyable. And use your strengths, which is about figuring out what you're naturally good at. and finding new ways to use those strengths in your everyday life. Martin Seligman's research showed that doing this makes people happier and less depressed, and those benefits can last for months. Even if it's just little things, like if you love learning new things, maybe you make a point of learning one new fact about each city you travel to for work.
Yeah, cool. And we shouldn't forget to savor positive experiences, really pay attention to those good moments, appreciate them fully so they have a bigger impact. And then there's exercise your optimistic mindset, basically training your brain to see things in a more positive and hopeful way.
All of these are things you can start doing today. And the benefits aren't just for you. They affect how you interact with other people too, especially at work. Achor really emphasizes how important recognition and positive communication are in the workplace.
Yeah, the research shows that when managers recognize and encourage their employees regularly, it can lead to a big jump in productivity, up to 31% in one study. And get this, specific, thoughtful recognition, it can actually be more motivating than even money.
I like that.
Yeah, he gives this example of the Order of the Elephant at a Danish car company. Employees could give a little stuffed elephant to coworkers who did awesome work. It was a fun, tangible way to show appreciation and spread good vibes, which lifted everyone's spirits.
That's really cool. And the tone of our communication really matters too, right? Like constant negativity and angry outbursts. They can totally kill morale and productivity. There's this study at the Yale School of Management that found that teams with managers who are like upbeat and enthusiastic or calm and supportive, they were way more positive and profitable than teams with managers who were, down in the dumps or always grumpy.
Makes sense, right?
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the happiness advantage, I think the main message is pretty clear, right? Happiness isn't just this reward that comes after we're successful. It's actually a key part of what helps us get there.
Right. And for you, the listener, you tuned in to learn something new, and we hope we've given you a good understanding of this whole shift in how we think about success and well-being.
I want to leave you with this thought. What if you started focusing more on your own happiness, on building up those positive feelings?
Yeah.
How much could that unlock your potential and help you achieve even more in your life and at work? It really challenges that whole idea that we're supposed to just push and push and push before we allow ourselves to be happy.
Exactly.
Take a second and think about just one small thing from the stuff we talked about. One thing you could start doing right now. What really speaks to you as a starting point.
Yeah, think about that.
And that's our deep dive for today.
That's it.
Catch you guys next time.
Bye.